In 1933, the United States was breaking apart. 25% of the nation was unemployed. Millions of people stood in lines for bread. Banks permanently locked their doors. Life savings vanished overnight. Families starved in the streets. But the suffering was not universal. In the private clubs of Wall Street, the wealth had not disappeared. It was simply waiting. A small group of industrial titans watched the collapse of the country from above. They controlled the steel. They controlled the chemicals. They controlled the munitions. They controlled the banks. And they believed they owned the country. But they had a problem. A new president had just been elected. Franklin Delano Roosevelt entered the White House. He implemented a program called the New Deal. He created social safety nets. He regulated the banking sector. He empowered labor unions. Then he did something unforgivable. He took the United States off the gold standard. For the starving population, this was an economic rescue. For the billionaires, it was a declaration of war. Removing the gold standard stripped the financial elites of their absolute control over the nation's currency. They did not view Roosevelt as a president. They viewed him as a communist. They believed his policies would redistribute their wealth. They believed he would destroy the capitalist architecture that made them untouchable. They decided the president had to be removed. Not by election, by force. They looked across the Atlantic Ocean. They studied Europe. They watched Benito Mussolini march on Rome. They observed Adolf Hitler taking control of Germany. History remembers these regimes for their atrocities. The American billionaires in 1933 saw something else. They saw efficiency. They saw a system that outlawed labor strikes. They saw a system that silenced political opposition. They saw a system that violently protected private corporate interests. Fascism, to them, was not a horror story. It was a highly profitable business model, and they wanted to import it to Washington. The operation required a precise logistical plan. First, assemble a private army, 500,000 military veterans. Second, arm them with weapons supplied by the nation's top defense contractors. Third, march this army down Pennsylvania Avenue, surround the White House. They would not kill the president. A dead president becomes a martyr. Instead, they would force Roosevelt to sign a document. The document would create a new cabinet position, the Secretary of General Affairs. This new secretary would absorb all executive power. Roosevelt would remain in the White House, a hollow figurehead reading scripted speeches, while a dictator, chosen by Wall Street, ran the United States. It was a flawless strategy, except for one problem. Billionaires cannot lead an army of angry, starving veterans. The working class would never follow a banker into battle. The elites needed a proxy, a figurehead, someone the troops worshipped, someone who commanded absolute, unquestioning loyalty. They selected Major General Smedley Darlington Butler. At the time, Butler was the most decorated Marine in American history, a two-time recipient of the Medal of Honor. He had fought in the Philippines, he had fought in China, he had fought in Central America, he had fought in France. To the veterans of America, Butler was a god. He never sat behind a desk. He fought in the mud with his men. When the government attacked protesting veterans with tear gas in 1932, Butler was the only general who stood by them. The Wall Street syndicate knew Butler was angry with the current administration. They calculated that his ego and his influence made him the perfect weapon. They thought they could buy him. It was the greatest miscalculation in the history of American corporate power. The approach began in the summer of 1933. A man named Gerald McGuire made contact with the general. McGuire was not a politician. He was a bond broker. He worked for Grayson M.P. Murphy and Company, a powerful Wall Street brokerage firm. McGuire was the bagman. In a series of quiet meetings in empty hotel lobbies, McGuire revealed the plot. He offered Butler the dictatorship of the United States. He guaranteed $3 million in immediate operational funding. Adjusted for inflation, that is more than $60 million today. He claimed the syndicate had a reserve of $300 million if needed. Then McGuire started naming the backers, the titans of American industry, the heads of J.P. Morgan, the DuPont family, executives from General Motors, executives from Heinz, executives from Maxwell House. McGuire showed Butler the invisible architecture of American power. He handed Butler the keys to the country. Butler did not blink. He did not refuse the offer. He was a patriot, but he was also a veteran intelligence officer. He knew that if he walked into a police station with this story, he would be destroyed. He was one man. The people he was accusing owned the banks. They owned the factories. They owned the newspapers. They would crush him before sunset. He needed evidence. So General Butler went undercover. He pretended to accept the deal. For months, he played the role of the ambitious, greedy commander. He demanded logistical details. He asked where the weapons for 500,000 men would come from. McGuire told him Remington Arms would supply the rifles. DuPont would supply the munitions. Butler asked how they would control the public narrative. McGuire told him about a massive public relations front, the American Liberty League, a real organization heavily funded by the DuPonts. Its public mission was to defend the Constitution. Its hidden purpose was to flood the media with propaganda supporting the coup. Butler listened. He memorized the names. He memorized the corporate structures. He tracked the money. He built an airtight case against the most powerful men on earth. November 1934. General Smedley Butler walked into a closed-door session of the United States Congress, the McCormack-Dickstein Committee. Under oath, Butler dismantled the business plot. With military precision, he exposed the entire operation. He named McGuire. He named the brokerage firms. He named the funding sources. He named the weapons suppliers. The testimony leaked to the national press. The American public was stunned, but the billionaires were prepared. The Wall Street machine activated its greatest asset, the media. They did not launch an investigation. They launched a character assassination. The New York Times published a front-page editorial laughing at the accusations. They called it a gigantic hoax. They painted the most decorated Marine in history as a delusional, bitter old man. The accused elites released coordinated denials. Thomas Lamont of J.P. Morgan called it perfect moonshine. Irénée DuPont dismissed it as a joke. The propaganda worked. The public began to doubt the war hero. But behind closed doors, the Congressional Committee was working. They subpoenaed bank records. They interrogated McGuire. They cross-referenced Butler's intelligence. They looked at the ledgers. February 1935. The committee released its final report. The findings shattered the media narrative. The United States Congress officially concluded that General Smedley Butler was telling the truth. The secret meetings took place. Gerald McGuire had traveled to Europe to study fascist formations. The financial backing was real. The report explicitly stated that attempts to establish a fascist organization were discussed, planned, and might have been placed in execution. The government had official proof. A syndicate of Wall Street billionaires had committed high treason. The penalty for high treason in the United States is death. Here is what happened next. Nobody was arrested. Nobody was indicted. Nobody was dragged out of their mansion in handcuffs. Nobody was even forced to testify under oath. When the Congressional Committee released the public transcripts, they did something else. They heavily redacted the document. They scrubbed the names of the most powerful men from the official record. They deleted the corporations. They erased the billionaires from the history of their own crime. The men who planned the coup were simply too big to fail. The government realized that if they arrested the heads of J.P. Morgan and DuPont, the fragile American economy would completely collapse. The billionaires held a gun to the head of the Republic, and the Republic surrendered. General Smedley Butler died in 1940. He spent his final years warning the public about the dangers of corporate greed mixing with military power. He wrote a book titled War is a Racket, but the story of the business plot was quietly buried. It was erased from American textbooks. The corporations that tried to overthrow the government suffered no consequences. They continued to grow. They secured massive government contracts during World War II. They still dominate the global economy today. The buildings they operate from are still standing in New York. The wealth they protected is still compounding. They attempted to destroy the American government, and their only punishment was success. In America, justice is blind, unless you own the court.